Have you ever noticed how stories about light and revelation often get used to draw hard lines between who supposedly has the truth and who doesn't? As if illumination is something granted to a select few, rather than something we can all pursue through curiosity, courage, and honest reflection. The irony is that some of the most mythological parts of the Bible, the parts about stars and visions and mysterious guidance, actually point towards something far more grounded. The human struggle to seek understanding, to welcome people who are different from us, and to become the kind of example that helps others find their way. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the Epiphany of the Lord, we'll explore how these ancient stories invite us to shine more brightly in the world, to stay committed to the pursuit of truth, and to build communities where differences aren't threats, but strengths. In this episode, we're asking an honest question. What does it take to become the kind of person and the kind of community whose light actually helps others grow, instead of trying to control or diminish them? So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the Epiphany of the Lord, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't require belief in the supernatural. These texts were written by pre-scientific people, shaped by their own cultures, needs, and agendas, not as history books or scientific manuals, but as meaning-making stories for their communities. And just like believers approach these writings through the lens of faith, I approach them through a more humanistic lens, one grounded in the idea that certain foundational values helped humans evolve and flourish. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, or you might find something completely different. That's the beauty of treating these writings as sacred myth. We're free to negotiate with the text and discover whatever insights we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the Epiphany of the Lord, Cycle A. Our first reading is from Isaiah. It's chapter 60, verses 1 through 6. Our second reading is from the letter to the Ephesians. It's chapter 3, verses 2 through 3a, and verses 5 and 6. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. It's chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. So with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from the prophet Isaiah. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the hip. Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To you the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah. And all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. Our second reading is from the letter to the Ephesians. Brothers and sisters, surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you, that is, the mystery made known to me by revelation. It was not made known to people in other generations, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to God's holy apostles and prophets. This mystery is that through the gospel, The Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, and sharers together in the promise in Christ Jesus. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them from where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah's call to arise, shine, comes from a people who are returning home to ruins, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They weren't being told to magically glow with divine energy. They were being encouraged to bring light into a world that felt overwhelmingly dark. In a humanistic sense, this passage is a deeply relatable moment. And when everything around us feels broken or uncertain, well, it's tempting to just sort of shrink inward. But here, the call is the opposite. Stand up, shine anyway, and let your renewed hope become contagious. That's not supernatural intervention. That's resilience, courage, and the stubborn belief that things can get better. The imagery of nations gathering around Zion's light is often claimed as prophecy about Jesus. But historically, it was about rebuilding a devastated community. People aren't drawn to you because a deity flips a switch. They're drawn because of integrity, creativity, generosity, compassion. They're drawn to the light we create together. This is a reminder that influence doesn't come from dominance or divine endorsement. Influence comes from living in a way that inspires others to rise with you. When we cultivate strong values and act with clarity and purpose, we naturally become a point of connection for others who are seeking direction. And then there's the idea of abundance flowing toward this restored community. The camels, gold, frankincense, all the symbolic imagery of prosperity. Instead of reading this as magical wealth arriving on its own, we can view it as what happens when people rally around shared hope. Prosperity. Material, emotional, communal prosperity tends to gather wherever people shine brightly enough to draw others in. The message is not, wait for a savior. The message is, become a source of possibility. Communities thrive when people step into the metaphorical light together. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that we should strive to be a shining example for others to follow. Isaiah's vision isn't about divine favoritism. It's about what humans can build when they choose to illuminate the darkness rather than being defined by it. We don't need supernatural permission to rise, shine, or lead. We just need the willingness to embody the kind of hope and integrity that others naturally gravitate toward. We should strive to be a shining example for others to follow. Our second reading was from the letter to the Ephesians, and Paul frames this passage as the unveiling of a great mystery. The shocking idea that Gentiles and Jews are equal partners, equal heirs, equal members of the same community. Now, in his world, that was radical. But beneath the theological packaging is a deep human truth. We thrive when we stop drawing hard lines around who belongs and who doesn't. Every society in history has struggled with the temptation to divide. Us versus them, right? Insider versus outsider, pure versus impure. And yet, progress has always come when people challenge those divisions and widen the circle of belonging. That's the real revelation here. Unity is not a divine decree. Unity is a human choice. Instead of treating belonging as something doled out by prophets or gatekeepers, we can interpret this mystery revealed as what happens when people gain new insight about the world. Human understanding evolves. Cultural walls can fall. Prejudice can be unlearned. What Paul describes as spirit-driven revelation could just as easily be described as the slow, courageous work of rethinking old assumptions. Communities flourish when they embrace the idea that differences don't threaten us, they enrich us. When we recognize that diversity brings strength, creativity, and resilience, we naturally build spaces where people from different backgrounds can stand side by side with dignity. Now, the metaphor of being members of one body, it's powerful, even without the religious layers. It reminds us that our well-being is intertwined. A body cannot thrive if one part claims superiority over another, or if one part refuses to acknowledge the rest. In the same way, a community cannot flourish if people cling to hierarchy, gatekeeping, or inherited hostility. True unity comes from shared purpose, cooperation, mutual care, and an understanding that our differences are not obstacles, they're contributions. When we see ourselves as connected in that way, we treat each other with more empathy and more fairness. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that we must build communities that welcome differences. This passage, stripped of its supernatural claims, is ultimately a call to radical inclusivity, radical acceptance, and shared humanity. It invites us to question old divides, to welcome new voices, and then create communities that are grounded in equality rather than exclusion. If we want a world where everyone can belong and flourish, we have to build it deliberately. One act of openness, one bridge, one conversation at a time. We must build communities that welcome differences. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Matthew. And this story of the Magi is filled with mythological imagery. A wandering star that acts like a GPS marker in the sky, a paranoid king, and foreign sages who somehow know more about what's happening than the people living there. Historically, the details don't line up, but the symbolic message is powerful. Wisdom often comes from unexpected places. These travelers represent curiosity at its best. People willing to go beyond the boundaries of their own culture, traditions, and comfort to seek something meaningful. They model what it looks like to pursue truth even when it takes you far from familiar ground. That's a profoundly human journey. Herod, on the other hand, represents a very different impulse: fear of the unknown. When faced with the possibility of change, he reacts the way insecure power always reacts, by trying to control or destroy what he doesn't understand. This contrast between the open-hearted curiosity of the Magi and the fearful rigidity of Herod, it's not just an ancient story. It's a recognizable pattern in human behavior. Whenever we pursue truth, especially truths that challenge established norms or our personal comfort, we're going to encounter resistance from systems, from other people, sometimes from within ourselves, quite often from within ourselves. The story asks, though, which response will you embody? What's most striking is that the Magi don't just pursue truth. They adapt along the way. They ask questions. They reevaluate their assumptions. When they sense danger, they change course and return home by another way, showing that courage isn't just boldness. Courage is also flexibility, discernment, and a willingness to rethink your path when new evidence is uncovered. Their journey, then, becomes a reminder that wisdom is not a fixed destination, but rather an ongoing process of learning, unlearning, adjusting, and growing. That's something anyone can relate to, regardless of belief. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we must courageously continue to pursue the truth. At its core, this story encourages us to be more like the seekers than like the king. It encourages us to stay curious, to question inherited claims, and to follow evidence even when it leads us to some unexpected places. Truth rarely arrives wrapped neatly as a package on your doorstep. It usually asks us to take a journey, to stretch our understanding, and quite often to confront our fears. And like the Magi, we can choose to keep going, keep learning, and keep adjusting our path as we discover more. We must courageously continue to pursue the truth. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Isaiah, the main lesson I came away with was we should strive to be a shining example for others to follow. In our second reading from the letter to the Ephesians, the main lesson I got was we must build communities that welcome differences. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was we must courageously continue to pursue the truth. If we really want to live as light for others, not in some mystical sense, but in a grounded human way, it starts with doing the inner work of figuring out what values actually deserve to guide our lives. And that requires more than good intentions. It means being brave enough to keep searching for truth, even when it challenges our assumptions, stretches our comfort zone, or forces us to grow. When we commit to that kind of honest, resilient pursuit of what's real and what's right, we naturally become the kind of people others can trust and can look to. And that's also how we build communities that genuinely welcome differences, because when our values are solid, inclusive, and freely chosen, they form the kind of foundation where everyone can belong and thrive. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall, see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care because the gap between what these ancient stories say and how some Christians use them seems to be getting wider every day. And that gap is hurting real people. These readings carry valuable human lessons about seeking truth, welcoming differences, and becoming a positive force in the world. But those lessons only matter if we intentionally reclaim them. We should care because too many Christians today use these stories as weapons rather than wisdom. Instead of admitting that these tales were shaped by the beliefs, fears, and political realities of ancient people, they declare them unquestionable and then twist them into tools for excluding or punishing anyone who doesn't fit their narrow worldview. Rather than arguing over whether the stories are literally true, we can highlight the values inside those stories, the parts that promote compassion and curiosity and courage and unity. And then we can use those to build common ground. This is important because Christian nationalists and many evangelicals are acting much more like Herod than like the Magi. Herod represents fear of the unfamiliar, a desperate need for control, and a willingness to harm those he doesn't understand. That same fearful posture is driving attacks on immigrants, LGBTQ plus people, secular Americans, and anyone who challenges the preferred hierarchy. When fear becomes the guiding principle, cruelty becomes predictable. The story of the Magi shows a different approach, seeking truth across cultures, listening, learning, and adjusting course when new information appears. That's the model worth following. We should care about this because dominionism, the political ideology pushing for Christian control over government and all of society, dominionism is built on fear, not on honest engagement with the core values these readings actually promote. Dominionism is not about welcoming differences. It's not about pursuing truth or shining a light for others to follow. It's about enforcing obedience. And once obedience becomes your highest virtue, your integrity collapses. The readings themselves push toward a worldview where people of diverse backgrounds come together with shared dignity. Dominionism pushes toward a worldview where only one group deserves power. We should care about these lessons because they give us something constructive to do with these ancient stories. Instead of letting the loudest, angriest voices dictate how Scripture is understood, we can engage with the stories ourselves and ask, what still holds value? What helps us grow? What in here points toward a better world? Even if others ignore these teachings, we can use them as springboards for reflection, growth, and community building. We can extract the parts that elevate humanity and then refuse to participate in the parts that diminish it. If we do that, if we reclaim the wisdom without the weaponizing, we can live out the best of these stories even when those who claim them as sacred seem determined to ignore their most important lessons. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Sometimes the hardest part of growth is recognizing the gap between who we want to be and how we actually show up in everyday life. It's easy to talk about shining a light or welcoming differences, but most of us can name at least a few situations where we didn't quite live up to our own values. Moments when fear, impatience, or habit got in the way. Becoming a better example for others starts with honest reflection, not shame, and definitely not with perfection. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. Where in your life are you not living as the example you want to be? And what is one concrete change you could make to move closer to the person you intend to become? Now, this question matters because real transformation begins with self-awareness. When you identify specific places where your values and your actions don't quite align, whether it's how you handle conflict, how you treat people who frustrate you, or how you show up in your community, whatever it is, you give yourself a starting point for meaningful change when you identify that gap between the actions you're taking and the values you're claiming. Back in 1993, when I was 26 years old, I took a job as a supervisor in a General Motors engine plant in Livonia, Michigan. I had never worked in a factory before. I'd never been anyone's supervisor. And every single guy on my team was older than my father. And all of them had been with GM longer than I'd been alive. The general foreman told me, just let the guys do their thing. They know their jobs. You just handle the timekeeping, pass along instructions, and stay out of their way. So that's what I did. Nothing went wrong. Nobody complained. I was making more money than I ever had before. So by all external measures, things were fine. But internally, it bugged the shit out of me. I wasn't being the kind of leader I wanted to be. I was basically a warm body with a clipboard. I could have coasted that way for years, just like plenty of other foremen seem to be doing. But the gap between the example I wanted to set and the one I was actually living kept getting bigger and just louder in my own mind. So I changed things. I started learning every job my team performed. I asked questions, lots of them. I challenged practices that didn't make sense, and then I suggested improvements. The guys didn't love it. At first, they saw me as this young punk who didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But when a few of them actually listened, they realized, well, my questions weren't actually all that naive. In fact, they were kind of useful, and some of my suggestions actually made their work easier or even started solving some long-standing problems. Slowly, I earned their trust. I think the real turning point came when the team lead, this gruff but quiet kind of guy, pulled me aside about a personal crisis he was having. He suspected his daughter was being abused by her husband, and he didn't know what to do. Now, he had seen the way I cared about the job and the team, and he'd heard me talk about my volunteer work with youth and young adults, so he came to me for help. Now, we spent several long conversations working through everything, and my support helped him navigate something that was incredibly painful for him. But after that, he became my biggest advocate. And with his backing, I stepped fully into the kind of leadership I had envisioned for myself. I did so well, in fact, that I was later asked to help implement a similar program at a much larger General Motors plant. And none of it would have happened if I had just kept doing what I was told and stayed out of the way. It happened because I stopped coasting. I got honest about the example I wanted to set, and then I made the changes necessary to actually live it. You see, once you name the gap between who you are and who you want to be, that's when you can begin bridging it through small, doable steps instead of vague aspirations. Now, that might mean pausing before reacting or reaching out more intentionally. It could mean adjusting your tone or rethinking old habits. But over time, these small adjustments, they reshape how others experience you and how you experience yourself. Where in your life are you not living as the example you want to be? And what is one concrete change you could make to move closer to being the person you intend to become? Answering this question won't magically make you a shining example, but it will point you toward the kind of steady, practical growth that makes a real difference in your relationships and in your community. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. Austrian-American consultant and educator Peter Drucker said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." This quote gets right to the heart of our question. We spend so much time wishing we were better in certain areas of our lives, more patient, more courageous, more consistent, more aligned with our values. But Drucker reminds us that change isn't something we wait for. Change is something we do. When we look honestly at where we're falling short of the example we want to set, we're not just reflecting, we're opening the door to creation. And that matters because becoming a better version of ourselves isn't a mystical transformation. It's certainly not just a stroke of luck. It happens the moment we take ownership of the ways we want to grow and then begin shaping our future through small, intentional steps. The moment we say, "This is who I want to be," and then act on that, that's the moment we stop being passengers in our own lives and start becoming the kind of people who inspire others, not because we're perfect, but because we're purposeful. So as you sit with this week's question, remember Drucker's reminder, the future version of yourself, the one who lives their values more fully, who shows up with clarity, courage, and integrity. That's not something you discover. It's something you create. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the Epiphany of the Lord, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that when our values are solid, inclusive, and freely chosen, they form the kind of foundation where everyone can belong and thrive. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved, worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations are released as a podcast. You can find the podcast at thecodaproject.com or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Pocket Casts. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.